This is Change is Possible podcast, and I'm your host, Ani Filipova. There is always a time in your career when you feel stuck, uninspired, and you're looking for a change. That's why I created this podcast, to help you make your career change possible. Each of our guests has made a successful career change, and we are going to discuss practical advice, actionable tips, and inspirational stories that can help you to get unstuck and transition into the work that you love. Let's tune in. Hi everyone, my guest today is Jay Shaw. He's a serial entrepreneur with a very unusual start to his career. He was a commercial fisherman for 10 years. After that, he became an English teacher in China. And since then, Jay has spent 20 years as an entrepreneur in the IT industry. Jay co-founded and served as a CEO at the NetDimensions. This was a technology company acquired in 2017 after listing on the London Stock Exchange. Then he founded and became the CEO of Praxonomy, a UK-based software company that provides board portal solutions to listed and private companies, NGOs, and fund management groups. So it will be an interesting podcast. Hey Jay, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Hi Annie, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So let's dive into it. I want to start with the very beginning. You had a very unusual start to your professional career, right? You left school and you became a fisherman, not a profession that I've seen very often, to be honest, and especially for a serial entrepreneur like you. So can you talk about this, and also what are these other personal and professional experiences that formed you or made you become what you are today?
Let me start by saying you're right. I don't get to meet a lot of people who did years and years in commercial fishing. It's not a common occupation, especially for people who end up in the professions or business. However, it was normal in my family. My mother's family is from the Bahamas, and they have 400 years of history as fishermen on the island of Abaco. So it wasn't at all a stretch for me to consider fishing when I was a teenager. It was a pretty usual choice in my family. And in fact, my grandfather was a fisherman who had clients for deep sea fishing like Ernest Hemingway. So it runs in the family, actually. I was fishing and was in my early 20s and decided it would be a good move to get some of that education. So there's a wonderful public university on Long Island called Stony Brook, and the courses were very affordable, and it was a very good school. And I decided I would go up on Tuesdays and Thursdays and take some classes. I thought I probably needed a language, and the only language that fit my time schedule was Mandarin Chinese. So I started taking Chinese. And after a couple years of it, I was a little bored of fishing and going to school part-time. And I mentioned it to my Chinese instructor, one wonderful woman. And she said, I have friends in China. If you want to work in China, I can arrange an interview. It was quite interesting because her friends in China were in a government department, the first ministry. It was It doesn't exist anymore, but it had 5 million workers at the time and concentrated on heavy industry and defense issues. And they had groups, large groups actually, mostly party members, Communist Party members, who'd been displaced because of the Cultural Revolution or whose careers had been interrupted. And they were trying to get them back onto some kind of track. So I interviewed with an official from the ministry at the Chinese consulate in New York. Your listeners might be interested in how I actually got the job when I interviewed, because I had no qualifications to be a language teacher or anything else at the time. But I thought to myself, what is the ministry trying to accomplish? What is it that they want to see out of this? And part of it was learning English, part of it was increasing familiarity with U.S. academic processes. I just knocked on the door of the office of a professor at Stony Brook, Susan Ansara. She's a brilliant, wonderful woman and very very gracious and very generous with her time. And I sat down and I said, look, I have this interview to go to China and work with a whole bunch of people. If you were designing a program for them, what would it look like? And we talked it through, and she gave me the names of a bunch of books and walked me through how to create syllabi and all of that. And so I actually created the course before the interview. And I walked into the interview with all the materials and the course. And I said, if you hire me, this is what we're going to do. And they said, you're hired. And about a year later, I actually put Dr. Ansara in touch with some of the Chinese officials working on these academic reintroduction programs. And she ended up creating a university-to-university exchange program out of it. So it wasn't a waste of her afternoon to talk to me. It turned out well for her at the university as well.
So you did that for a couple of years, and then what happened? You went back to the US?
I went back to New York, and I was scrambling a little bit, trying to find work, wasn't sure what to do. And friends of mine had gone to Princeton University, graduated, landed in New York, and they were all doing entry-level jobs in publishing or the arts, whatever they were doing. And they were working part-time for a tutoring company called the Princeton Review, which helped teenagers prepare to take the SATs, the American University entrance examinations, and the GMAT for business school, and the GRE for PhD and master's programs, and the LSAT for law school. And my friend said, why don't you go interview? And I said, they'll never hire me. I didn't go to Princeton or Yale or Harvard. In fact, I don't have a degree. There's no way they're going to hire me. And they said, just go. It's by audition. And so I went, and the audition was to take a test and then chat with the hiring manager. And they put us all into an 8 or 10 week training program on how to teach their courses, during which more than half the people were cut, which was surprising to me. So we started out, about 150 people altogether, and we ended up about 70. So got to the end of it and then started to work for them. And I was assigned to teach one course for which they gave me a text, and I thought it was awful. So I went into their office shortly after that, and I said, look, you gave me a text that's really substandard. It's not very good on the subject matter. So I wrote a new textbook last week, and I'm giving this to you because you need to look at quality. And so I gave it to them, and they came back to me and said, would you work for us full time? And I said, yeah. And that's how I got started on my next career. And then I eventually ended up buying franchises for that service in Asia and opening offices in Asia. So that's how I kind of got back to Asia.
Yeah, I see. Was this the next step into your own franchise? Is that true?
So I opened Princeton Review operations in South Korea, in Taiwan and Hong Kong, helped open in Japan and Singapore and Malaysia. And I thought the idea of training is very interesting. So I thought, Princeton Review is all about helping kids with transitions in their lives, and it's very focused on academics. But there must be other training options that are interesting. And one morning, actually, very early in the morning, I saw somebody I know in Hong Kong who was a financial analyst, and he looked terrible. And I said, Phil, you look like 40 miles of bad road. What are you doing? And he said, I just got off a plane from San Francisco, and I have to go straight to work. And I said, you're not giving yourself any decompression time? And he said, I'd already used up my vacation, and I had to go to San Francisco to take a class. And I said, what class is so important that you do this to yourself? And he said, well, the Stala CFA class. And I said, what's a Stala? What's a CFA? And he explained to me that Chartered Financial Analyst is a designation that many people in finance get, and Dr. Sala ran either the best or one of the best courses, so he went to take it. And I said, are you the only person from Hong Kong doing this? And he said, no, this is global. There are lots and lots of people in Hong Kong and Singapore and other places who are taking these exams. And actually the 3-year pass rates for these exams at the time were terrible. I think something 70-80% failed to complete in 3 years. It wasn't easy, even for people who were in the industry, who had MBAs. These were well-educated, sharp people. And I thought, well, this must be tough. So I did a little research and found out who the top players were. And sure enough, Stalo was considered the best. And so I called his office in Cleveland, Ohio, and said, would you like to come to Hong Kong and do this? And the office manager said, no. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I tracked down his home phone number and I called his wife. And I said, Mrs. Stalo, you don't know me, but I really want your husband to come to Asia and teach these courses. And have you ever been to Asia? And she said, no. And I said, would you like to come? And she said, yeah. And I said, I tell you what, we'll do this in a way so that your husband can come, you can come, and you can bring a couple of your kids if you want. So we'll make it a tour. You'll do Hong Kong and Singapore. And she said, let me talk to my husband. And then she called me back the next week, and she said, he's convinced we're coming. And so I started doing finance training that way. And I thought, this is interesting. What else do these people need? So I opened a company called Niche just to do finance training and started working for investment banks. And we had clients like Goldman Sachs and then Lehman Brothers, they don't exist anymore, and Solomon Smith Barney and blah-de-da. We also did STC courses. These were courses for people to get licenses. So the series exams licenses, Series 16, Series 8, Series this, Series that. And we brought people to Asia to do these courses. And I thought, well, maybe there's more. So I started talking to some of these banks and said, what do you need? And turned out their needs were endless, actually. So one of the first projects we did was for portfolio management. I think it was for Goldman Sachs. And so I found a professor who specialized in portfolio management. And I said, look, Goldman Sachs has a whole bunch of people. They're willing to fly them all into Hong Kong for a week if you'll do a course and teach them more about your specialty. And he said, I'm game. So we basically wrote a book. It turned out to be 200 or 300 pages long. Or I should say, he wrote it, I edited it, and set it up for printing. And we did this for Goldman Sachs, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. And I said, okay, this is a new business. I'm not quite in the business I thought I was going to be in. So I grew the professional training, and then I ended up selling part of it, not to the Princeton Review. They weren't interested, but to their biggest competitor, Kaplan. So they ended up buying rights to some of the stuff I had developed in Asia, which I thought was fun and interesting. So I did that. But at the same time, this internet thing was happening.
Technology coming.
Yeah, I had a friend I went sailing with. We used to race together on his 27-foot Impala sailboat. And we were very competitive at the back of the pack, actually. We weren't the best sailors, but we had fun. We raced once or twice a week. And he was one of the global co-heads at Sybase, which is now owned by SAP. His name is Ray Roth. And I remember talking to him, and I said, Ray, this whole internet thing, it's going to change everything. And everybody's talking about consumer this and consumer that, but I think it's going to change businesses too. And it's going to change HR, and it's going to change training. So why don't you quit your day job and let's open a company and create technology platforms to service training? And he said, no. He said, I've got a great job at Sybase. Why don't you come to Sybase and pitch the idea? Maybe they'll get behind it. And I said, okay, great. So I went to Sybase and had a talk with a couple of their execs, and they said, look, we have to shoot this back to California. Give us a minute. And so they did that. And they came back to me and they said, look, it would be good if you could bring in an industry heavyweight to talk to our executives about this. And I said, okay, fine. So I called the then global co-head of training at HSBC. Was a wonderful man. And I said, look, Sybase already sells you databases and related technology. Would you be willing to just go and have a chat with some of their executives about how you manage training? and let's just see if there's any opportunity to bring technology into the picture. And he said, fine. And I called Sybase and told them that I had arranged for him to come talk to them. And I think they probably put 15 executives in that meeting. It was amazing. It was me, the HSBC guy, and just a table full of Sybase executives. We talked all afternoon. We had a very long conversation. And the gentleman from HSBC was happy. He got some good ideas out of it. And the person I was dealing with at Sybase said, let me throw this back to California. And he did. And he came back to me and he said, look, we're very interested. We're beginning to create silo applications, so not just horizontal software solutions, but industry and role-specific applications. And California thinks this might be a good one, so they've decided to pursue it. And we're going to go into business with a company in the U.S. as a joint venture to develop technology around this. And thank you very much for your idea. So I called Ray and told him about the response. And I said, Ray, they're going to fail. And he said, why are you saying that? I said, I was in that meeting. These guys know nothing about HR. They know nothing about adult education. They know nothing about training. They are definitely going to fail. They're not going to get this right. And I said to him again, I said, why don't you just quit your job? Let's open a company. He said, okay. So we were literally 2 men and 2 dogs. I rented a tiny little office in Central in Hong Kong. And we started working on a product. He would build, and I would go show it to people. And our first client was ING. We ended up getting hundreds more and turned it into a viable business. We listed it on the London Stock Exchange and eventually sold it. So that was the background to that.
What is to be an entrepreneur? Because there are many people who are in the corporate life, actually have a corporate jobs, and the entrepreneurship is something that everybody says, oh, that's so great. You know, the grass is always greener on the other side. But what is it to be an entrepreneur? And what are the most essential qualities you need to succeed?
Wow. I'm not sure there's any single recipe for it. But I do think there are some traits that tend to recur amongst entrepreneurs. And one of them is a silly optimism. You have to believe that change is possible. Change is possible. I know a podcast whose title is something like that. And you have to believe that it is within your zone of control or your power to maybe help affect some of that change. And you have to be enthused about it. You have to want to make some difference in the world. So those things, I think, are common baseline traits for entrepreneurs. If you talk about characteristics of entrepreneurs themselves, again, I think entrepreneurs come in all shapes and sizes. There is no single right answer. But some of the common traits would be stubborn determination. You get a lot of no's when you try to start a business. Everything is a no. Everybody's a no. People are saying you're silly. Either the field doesn't exist, or there are too many players already, or you're not going to create a unique selling proposition, or there's no way you'll succeed against the entrenched competition, on and on and on and on. So you need to be somewhat stubborn, and you need to be able to ignore the naysayers to some extent, because if you think there is an opportunity to do something different or something new, or there's some unmet market need, you're not necessarily going to get a lot of positive reinforcement on that thinking. So you need to be able to withstand that psychologically. So that's one thing. You need to be willing to work. I mean, I joke that my entire life has been about avoiding getting an adult job. But the truth is, when you open your own company, big or small, whether it's a neighborhood restaurant or something a little more widespread, you're going to put in a lot of hours. You're going to work. So you need the energy for that. And, you know, the American boxer Mike Tyson is famous for being asked at a press conference once about one of his opponents who said, yeah, I'm going to beat Mike. I have a plan. And Mike Tyson said, yeah, right. Everybody's got a plan until I punch him in the face. If you substituted the words business reality for Mike Tyson, every entrepreneur's got a plan until real life punches them in the face and says, no, that's not going to work. So you have to be extremely flexible, and you have to be able to take the knockdowns. You have to be resilient, because the business you end up being in may not be the business you thought you were going to be in to start with, or it may not be done the way you thought it might be done. There's an interesting little mini test for entrepreneurial qualities. And the test, you've probably heard of it. It's really simple. You flip a coin, and if you win, whatever your net worth is doubled. If you lose everything. And that's one variety. And the question is, would you take this bet? Would you do it? And a lot of entrepreneurs say yes. Not because they want to lose everything they built, but because they believe, rightly or wrongly, that they're either going to win, or if they lose, they can rebuild it. It's not the end of the world. And then there's a variation of this game where you're asked, okay, given that it might double or you might lose everything, what percentage of your net worth would you risk? And reasonable professionals say 0 to 50, usually 10 to 20%. Entrepreneurs are all north of 50%. I think appetite for risk is a big issue in entrepreneurs.
So what was the incentive after that to start and create another company when you're at the stage in your life where you're comfortable and you can just play golf somewhere and enjoy life in general? You created your company that you currently have, right?
I created my company, and I put in most of the financing for the company. So not only have I done the deed, I've actually put my reputation and my money on
invested
as well. Yeah, my wife has made me promise that after Praxonomy I won't do anymore. She said, "Look, when this company is a big success, you are going to retire." And I said, "Okay." It was born out of a funny happening. So we were so lucky at NetDimensions to have wonderful board members, and one of them was a woman named Anna Thompson, who is a senior executive at the Swire Corporation. And for those of your podcast audience who don't know the Swire conglomerate, it's gigantic. If you count their agricultural workers, they have more than 500,000 employees. They are the biggest Coca-Cola bottler in the world. They are one of the most important ship management and logistics management companies in the world. They are a major real estate developer in Hong Kong and China, but also places like Miami, Florida. So Anna Thompson, who's a wonderful non-executive director, suggested that we get ourselves a board portal. And I looked at the one they were using and thought it was fine, but basic and overpriced. So I just built one, our own use. And interestingly, Anna came back and she said, "This is so much better than Swire's. This is really easy to use. It's very logical. I get things quite quickly. It's not complicated. I like this." And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then that year, the audit partner at PwC, who did our annual audit, her team told our CFO that we had the best board book she'd ever audited. And I thought, there's nothing magic about what I did. I just took 10 years of records and put it online and made it easily searchable in this portal. And so she was very happy about it. And I thought, I wonder if there's something here. So I called Swire's provider back and I said, I might be interested in buying from you still, but do you guys make any money? And surprisingly, they gave me their financials. They told me what they were doing. And shortly after that, NASDAQ bought them for $200 million US, which is about 10 times their revenue. And I thought, well, maybe there's something here. So I did a little research and found out that they weren't the big player. The big player was a private equity-backed company called Diligent. And I thought, wow, I guess there is a bit of a GRC, a governance risk and compliance story here, and there is a market sector for this kind of thing. And looking at it, it seemed to me that the incumbents were tailoring their offerings to very large corporates, very large listed companies. but that nobody was really catering to small cap and mid cap companies and private organizations that might have a need but didn't have the kind of budget that a large company would have. And if it did have a need, wouldn't need scores of APIs to connect to various enterprise systems. It would need a somewhat stripped down version. So after we sold NetDimensions, I thought, why don't we start a company and we'll do this? We'll actually create a new product and we'll make it a bit disruptive. We'll price it far lower than the tier one products currently on the market, but we'll make sure that what we have is a tier one offering, and we'll make it easier for smaller companies to buy it. So that's where the idea came from.
And Jay, you started your company Praxonomy everything hit, COVID, geopolitical issues. How a startup, a young company like this, manages in this situation?
Think of Mike Tyson. Think of Mike Tyson.
Yeah, absolutely. But I just can't imagine, because I, at that time, was working in a big corporation, and whatever it is, a small company, what are the resources? How do you manage? How do you go through?
So in the end, we decided we had to move the company. We thought, there isn't enough of a future for us in Hong Kong to justify staying. So we reflagged and we became a UK company, and in effect started again. So now we have UK-based employees, and we are concentrating UK and continental European markets. And it's been a bit of the exercise and flexibility that you asked about earlier when you wanted to know, what I thought the primary characteristics of entrepreneurship might be. So we just, we went with it. And I'm going to use a funny analogy here. I was once at an industry event where several of my competitor CEOs gave speeches, and the biggest in the market at that time, that the CEO stood up and he had a PowerPoint slide of a climber going up an icy mountain trail and said something to the effect of, we're all climbing the mountain, blah, blah, blah. And then the number two competitor CEO got up, and he too had a PowerPoint with a climber going up a mountain, but this time it was a rock face. And he said, it's a sheer cliff edge, blah, 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 blah. And then I was number three. And I got up and I put up a PowerPoint of a sailboat on the ocean. And I said, there is no mountain. And guess what? None of us is in control. If you're a good sailor, you try to read the water and the wind and go with it. And that's what we all have to do to bring this industry forward. And I realized that I really believe that. I don't think that you necessarily, very few companies invent entirely new categories of product or service. Apple's done it a couple times. A few other companies have done it. But very, very few companies get to do that. What companies really do is figure out unmet needs and then find new ways to address them.
I like this analogy. You have been living as a digital nomad in the last couple of years, right?
Yes.
And how can a digital nomad manage a company? Because there is all this rhetorics in the news, in the social media. Oh, you have to be in the office, you have to see the people. But there you are managing a company as a digital nomad. How does it work?
So COVID put paid to a lot of assumptions about how offices work and companies, including startup and scale-up companies, should work. And a great deal that was conventional wisdom before COVID suddenly was out the door. Lots of companies have problems getting people together in offices and have had those problems for the last few years. I took the bet that with good conference calling, good conferencing capability, we could talk to each other enough so that people could work either alone or in small offices globally and get the job done. And interestingly, that has happened. I don't think that we've suffered as a company because of geographic dispersal. We have some employees still in Hong Kong, some in the UK, I live in Barbados, of all places, right now, and we have people who travel. We had for a while a team in Ukraine who were helping us with our iPhone app development, and they were in Kyiv, but the war there has changed all of that. So again, we've just kind of gone with the reality we were given and tried to figure out ways to work with it. And I must say it's worked fine. And I think it actually has some strengths over having everybody go to one office. And one of the strengths is you have a much bigger, you have a wealth of candidates to choose from when you're thinking about employee positions, because you're not bound by geography. And that's been startlingly positive, if you will. That's a good thing. Now, for me, what it means, since we have people in the UK and people in Asia, what it's meant for me is time zones are difficult. So, this morning I had a conference call at 2 a.m. This podcast with you is at 6 a.m. Started at 6 a.m. for me. And that's just normal. That's not something I get worked up about these days. You just make yourself available when needed.
Okay, so we are towards the end of our podcast. I always ask my guests to share 3 key things people should think about if they want to become entrepreneurs. 3 things. What would you say?
What can you do? So you have to have something, an idea, a sense of a market, an unmet need somewhere. So you need to have your eyes open and be keenly aware of opportunities in the day-to-day context. So you just need to keep hungry and keep aware. So that would be the first thing. The second thing I think is you need to be willing to jump. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. People do what's now called side hustle. Instead of diving headfirst into the cold winter water,
yeah,
they take a small step. Maybe you put your feet in a tub.
Yeah,
but you have to be willing to do something. I think you can talk forever and it never becomes anything. You have to do something. So there needs to be a willingness to take action. So number 1 would be an awareness and a positive outlook for opportunity. Number 2 would be a willingness to take action. And then number 3, I guess, would be something mentioned earlier, would be resilience, because whatever you decide to do, guaranteed it's not going to work, or it's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. So you need to be able to deal with the setbacks and pick yourself up and keep going, or slightly change course, whatever needs doing. So awareness, willingness, and resilience, I'd say are key attributes for entrepreneurialism.
Great ending for the podcast. Jay, it was such an interesting discussion. I learned so much about you and generally about life and universe. Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best with Praxonomy.
Thank you for inviting me, and it was an absolute pleasure. I hope we get to talk again someday.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode today. Please remember to review, rate and subscribe when you have a chance. You can do that on your favorite podcast platform or go to our site, changeispossible.site. Thank you once again and have a great day.